I'm Bill Roberts. I'm speaking to you today about fluid replacement in high school sports for both safety and performance. When you talk about fluid replacement during sports, there's really three phases: before, during, and after the activity. Maintaining fluid balance is really important for athletes because it allows you to preserve intravascular volume. And that intravascular volume allows the blood to transport oxygen, nutrients, waste products, and heat around the body. It also preserves the amount of fluid available for sweating, which is critical to the thermal control during activity. Monitoring fluid balance during activity is really, there's three easy ways to do it as an athlete in high school. One is thirst, two is pre and post body weight measured on the scale, and the third is urine color. Urine color can vary from clear, which is a little bit too much fluid on board, to very dark, which means there's not enough fluid on board. Just simply put, a drop in pre and post activity weights is the amount of fluid that you need to replace between sessions. So is replacing that amount of fluid to get back to where you were prior to your activity. A dark urine, like looking like apple juice, means that you don't have enough fluid on board, you're dehydrated. And ideally you're looking to have a urine color about that of lemonade. Thirst really is the measure of your serum osmolality, and serum osmolality is what reflects the body water content. So as osmolality rises, your body water content drops, and it's that drop in body water content that indicates dehydration. So you really can't ignore thirst during activity. It's really important to stay ahead of thirst, especially in activities where you're losing a lot of sweat. And the biggest challenge to fluid balance for high school athletes really occurs when you have more than one practice in a day, like double sessions, especially in football where you're wearing heavy equipment, or there's more than one game on the same day. Now, there aren't very many opportunities for more than one game on the same day in high school because the rules really are there to protect the kids from too many games on the same day. It's particularly difficult when it's very hot outside and when sweat losses are really high. So a hot, humid day with full football equipment on would be difficult. In the winter, a warm hockey arena with full equipment on might make it difficult for kids who aren't used to that temperature for hockey games and practices. When you look at replacing fluid between sessions, you really need a pint of fluid for every pound. And when it really comes down to it, because of the way the body reacts to fluid in the system, you need about 100%, 150% of your weight loss replaced with water or some type of fluid. That translates to 24 ounces of fluid for each pound that you lose during activity. And you really need more than 3 hours between events to get your fluid levels back to normal. Ideally, a full 24 hours is good. And during that time, you need to monitor your urine color for your overall hydration, your weight for your between activity hydration, and your thirst for immediate response to fluid levels. After an event, recovery fluids are easy to take, but the easiest and simplest fluid is chocolate skim milk. It's got carbohydrate, protein, salt, and water. Tastes good, it's easy to drink. If the event is the following day, you really have a lot more relaxed schedule, and getting the fluid in isn't quite as hard. You have to also remember that your regular meals help with your fluid balance. It's about half of the food content is water, so what you take in with food really brings up your water level in your body. Now, replacing fluid during games and practices is critical. First, it helps maintain your fluid balance for performance during the activity and also for heat safety. It improves your performance, and it decreases your need for aggressive replacement between games. So if you can keep your fluids up while you're active, it's going to help you between games and during your activity. Now, water is fine for most activities that last less than an hour, and that's almost all activities in the high school league last less than an hour of playing time. Now, it may last an hour and a half or two when you take in the breaks and that kind of thing, but those breaks are times to add fluid back to the system. Now, it's important that you practice drinking what you're going to use during your games and practices so that your stomach doesn't get upset when you're trying to rehydrate during activity. Sports drinks are good because they give you carbohydrate for energy replacement, and they do have distinct advantages after an hour of continuous activity. So that can be an advantage if you have more than one game a day, or if you have more than one practice on the same day. It can also be an advantage if you get into a situation like Apple Valley and Duluth East did several years ago in the state ice hockey tournament, when they went several overtimes and set a record for most minutes played in a game. That can be difficult if you're not getting the energy replacement that you need during the games. And sports drinks are an easy way to do that. Of course, it's pretty difficult going into a game to know that you're going to go into overtime. And having been there for that game, it was a long game. If I calculated right, it was the equivalent of playing almost 3 or 4 games in the same day. So fluid replacement on an individual basis is difficult to predict. It's highly variable from person to person. Sweat rates can vary from 12 ounces an hour to over 80 ounces an hour. So depending on how much you sweat, it determines how much fluid you have to replace. So there's no single volume statement that I can give you that's good for everybody. The gut can also only absorb about 32 ounces or 1 liter of fluid an hour. So if you're sweating more than 32 ounces an hour, you're not going to be able to replace your fluids even if you can do that much during an hour. So heavy sweaters are going to end any session that's longer than an hour somewhat dehydrated. So you need to really calculate your needs based on your weight loss and try to stay as close to normally rehydrated as you can. There really aren't any continuous activities in high school sports where you go for an hour without drinking or having a break to drink. Hockey has 3 periods, football has 4 quarters or 2 halves, basketball 2 halves, so at least during those halves or period breaks you can bring in fluids. The longest continuous activity is probably in cross-country running or Nordic skiing, where you're going for 20 to 40 minutes, depending how fast you are in the activity. When you look at starting the activity, it's good to start your activity fully hydrated. You have to remember that humans don't store excess water, they pee it off, so the timing is really important. You have to start with 12 to 16 ounces about 2 hours prior to your activity. That gives you time to absorb the fluid into the system and excrete or pee off the extra fluid that you don't need. And then about 20 minutes prior to activity, if you take 4 to 6 ounces, you actually are beginning to start pre-game or during game rehydration. So you start with something in the tank to take care of the sweating that you do during your activity. I think we want to talk a little bit about energy drinks and sports drinks. First, energy drinks are not sports drinks. They're stimulants. They're classed as supplements with the associated risks. They're not regulated by the FDA, which means they're not required to prove either effectiveness or safety. There's no oversight for purity in these products. They're advertised to give users an edge, but in scientific study done by Woolsey, although athletes feel like they're performing better, when you measure them, they make more errors because they're over-aroused and over-focused. It reduces their timing and their coordination, which is critical to skill performance in sports that require that kind of activity. Energy drinks contain mainly sugar, caffeine, and water. And the sugar and water and caffeine are in pretty high dose. There are other ingredients, and they are all reported to increase energy level and improve alertness, but none have known performance-enhancing properties. Common ones are ginseng and niacin, which cause vasodilatation and flushing, so you feel flushed and hot, but it gives you a sensation that you may have more energy, but there are no real energizing properties that come from these ingredients that we know of that can be proven. The energizing properties probably come from caffeine and sugar that are in the stimulant drinks. Stimulants are associated with side effects, and among those side effects are tachycardia, nervousness, anxiety, tremor, laxative effects and sleep disturbance, aggressiveness, and hallucinations. There's also an increased risk of stroke, heart attack, and cardiac arrhythmias and sudden death with stimulants. Now, caffeine is one of the most frequently used psychoactive drugs around the world. In low doses, it's known to improve performance because it directly affects the central nervous system during exercise and allows higher concentrations of stimulatory neurotransmitters, with things in your brain that stimulate you to do more things quicker. It also can improve concentration, reduce fatigue, and enhance alertness. So at low doses, there may be some actual effect to it. The chronic use of caffeine, however, is associated with dependence, tolerance, drug cravings, and abrupt withdrawal can cause withdrawal symptoms which are very unpleasant and include headache and jitteriness. So if you're a chronic high caffeine use user, you may not get the same effect from caffeine that someone who doesn't use caffeine very often will in a sporting event. Now, caffeine is being used by kids as young as 11 years old to seek a boost in performance, and probably not the greatest idea for the younger athletes. Caffeine is no longer on the WADA, or World Anti-Doping Association, prohibited list, so it can be used by athletes for performance enhancement without risk of losing eligibility. There is a downside to fluids during activity. The main one is GI complaints, and as I alluded to earlier, if you don't practice with a drink that you're going to use during activities, you may get GI upset. There's more GI upset with sports drinks than there is with water. It's probably the carbohydrate component that's the culprit. So the carbohydrate in sports drinks is formulated to do the best job for you in terms of absorption and giving you energy during activity. Too much uses more upset and less absorption. Too little doesn't do the trick. Energy drinks have carbohydrate in very high concentrations and probably put you way over the mark for what would be useful during sports activity. So energy drinks used for athletes can upset your concentration and focus. It's best that you skip the energy drinks before and during competition, because it probably doesn't do much to help you in your competition and may actually be detrimental to your performance. It's better to utilize the proven replacements like water and sports drinks so that you're actually using things that help performance during activity. So in summary, fluid replacement is critical for athlete safety and performance. Fluids and foods in the normal diet help maintain normal body water and keep you hydrated. An individual hydration plan to replace weight loss during practice to ensure good hydration during the next day or next performance is useful and probably critical for athletes who are involved in high fluid loss sports like football, ice hockey, basketball, where you're sweating a lot in hot conditions. Sports drinks may help performance in longer duration games and activities, particularly if there's more than one activity in the same day. Most high school league activities in Minnesota don't last more than an hour, so the benefit may not be there unless you get into an overtime situation. Water is fine for almost every high school athletic event that we do, and it should be utilized as the main drink for high school athletes. Energy drinks should be avoided both for performance reasons and they probably aren't that healthy for kids. Probably better to spend your time getting adequate sleep and eating a good diet and training hard than spending money on the energy drinks. So just some quick hydration tips. First, water is fine. Second, sports drinks help you if your activity is greater than an hour. Energy drinks should not be used during sports. You want to try to remain within 2 to 3% of your baseline weight during your activities. So that means getting your fluid levels back to normal between activities and replacing fluids during your activities. You want to replace any weight that's lost during your activity with fluid before the next activity. There's adequate sodium and potassium in a normal diet, so you probably don't need to look for drinks that have that in them. You should weigh before and after activities so that you make sure that you're back to your normal baseline before you begin your next sports event. You want to keep your urine light yellow like lemonades around the clock so that you're adequately hydrated day round for both your school and your athletic activities. And you want to listen to your body and not ignore thirst when you feel thirsty. Thank you for your attention.